What is going on, y'all? I'm Cam Best. We're going to be making a tier list of cards to buy Series 4 and Series 5 heading into May. And I'm excited for this, mostly because some super awesome cards are downgrading. You can see there's a special category for them here. And we're just gonna go. We're just gonna talk about each card as it comes up, so hopefully you learn something about the cards themselves, as well as about my thoughts on each of them, how good each of them is, and whether or not you should buy them. So I have named my categories what I've named them. I get that some people might quibble at the name completely worthless, but that's just how I'm gonna have to be, because some of these cards are just completely worthless. So let's get it poppin'. First, start off with Darkhawk, who is, in my opinion, actually the best Series 4 or Series 5 card right now, but huge caveat is downgrading in May. So I'm putting him in his own little tier, downgrading in May. Downgrading in the expected downgrade date, May 16th or May 23rd. Remember that it's a 5-week season next month, and that means that you're gonna have time to play with him after the downgrade if you don't buy him. I do think he unlocks more tier 1 decks than basically any other card, but it might not be worth spending those tokens on him. Next up is Dazzler, who is going in the completely worthless tier. I don't even know if I need to say anything about that. That is not a good card. When you compare her to the Darkhawk that we just put in here, like, it's so clear the gap in power, right? Like, this is not a card that is worth buying at any price point at any time. Galactus is, unfortunately for, everyone on ladder, is absolutely going in buy this when you can tier. That is just the reality of the situation. Galactus is one of the strongest build around cards you can acquire, especially with Null going to Series 3 in this downgrade, or expected to go into Series 3 in this downgrade. This is a strong card. You're gonna have the support for it. It's tough. Next up is Ghost. Ghost is absolute trash with, like, maybe a few uses that you might be able to find. I don't hate her too much. She does have utility. I don't know if that utility will ever be usable. That said, I'm putting her in Please Do Not. She goes in Please Do Not here, as opposed to any of the other ones. I don't think she's completely worthless. There are scenarios that I can imagine in my head where I'm like, oh yeah, I could play that, because she is at least unique. With Dazzler, Dazzler is just a 4-cost beat stick that sucks. It's just worse than the other 4-cost beat sticks. At least Ghost does something unique. Next up is Hit Monkey, and I personally think Hit Monkey is one of the best cards in the game right now. Obviously, the more Sandman comes around, the more that can change, but right now I consider him a truly elite card. I would put him in the buy this when you can tier for his use in Sarah decks, for his use in the Moon Girl Monkey deck, for his use in bounce decks. Right now, the metagame rotates pretty heavily around decks that explode on turn 6. He is a core component of most of these decks. So Hitmonkey is, despite the fact that he was just on the Battle Pass, one of the best cards in Pool 4 and Pool 5 combined. Next up is Jeff. Jeff, I think, ends up in the elite role players tier, but you could argue that he goes into buy this when you can. I just think he goes a little bit below those cards, since he's not a 10th pole card that you build around. He's more just an inclusion that you make. You can put him in the deck and he will be pretty damn good most of the time you do that. There's obviously a couple decks, the Miles Morales decks with Stature in them, that really do need Jeff, but at 6,000 tokens, it's harder for me to recommend it than it is something that's like a true 10th pole card that you can build around. So I will put Jeff in the elite role players tier. Let's see. Next up is Kang. And I don't know what to do about Kang. I don't know what to do about Kang. He's a big bad. which is super cool, right? He's a big bad, which means he'll never be a bad investment, except for the fact that he kind of sucks, right? Like, that's the fundamental issue with Kang, is he's a big bad, but also he's bad. He's by far the worst of them. Like, it's... I want to put him in Are You Cooking, but you could honestly put him in Please Do Not. He's a tough card to talk about, because he does do things, but none of them are particularly compelling to me. The more specific you are... The more specific the thing you're scouting for is, the better he is. So I do see a lot of value to him in Galactus decks, but that's a pretty narrow use case. He is a useful card, but I think his usefulness gets overrated because people are like, oh, I snapped on the Kang and they left. And it's like, well, would you have won that game anyway? Because if you did, you actually cost yourself a cube rather than gaining yourself a cube. And some amount of those games you would have won anyway. Now, I don't know if that's enough to say he's like garbage. He's fine, I think, but I'm going to put him in Are You Cooking? Because unless you have a very specific idea for this dude, I don't think he's going to be worth your tokens. So unless you are like pretty sure you know exactly what you want him for, I would stay away from Kang, I think. So next up is Null. Downgrading in May. Incredible important part of the Galactus deck. The kind of key component of a lot of Galactus decks is the fact that you can play Galactus and then this arbitrarily large Null just slam the door shut. Null is the reason why people said that Galactus getting nerfed from 3 power to 2 power was actually a buff, because Null is going to be so large that that doesn't matter, and the counterplay of Enchantress and Shang-Chi is less viable against a 2 power Galactus because the Galactus player is going to lose priority more. And like that entire dynamic is down to Null. So that is definitely... It really speaks to the power of the card. It's a very limited card. I wouldn't spend tokens on it now, but when that thing downgrades, it's going to make you more likely to want Galactus. Next up is Master Mold. I think Master Mold is going somewhere in Are You Cooking or Please Do Not. I would think Master Mold is a card that is extremely limited. I think you're only ever going to buy Master Mold if you have a very specific idea of what you want to do with him. And I think like that specific idea is almost always going to be Ronin. And after Enchantress got buffed, I don't think you want to be being a Ronin guy right now. Like, there's a bunch of Enchantress decks running around. Maybe one of the interesting things about Master Mold that I think is cool is you can run him in like maybe a Sandman shell, but those shells are notoriously hard to make work in terms of fitting in cards that don't do anything to advance your game plan like Master Mold. I am tempted to say he's going to go in the Please Do Not tier, but at the very top of it, he's definitely better than Ghost in terms of a card I would enjoy having. Next up is MODOK, and MODOK is an absolutely elite role player. Now, he is extremely limited in his applications. He only goes in the discard deck. That's it. But he is absolutely required for the discard deck. He is one of the best cards in the discard deck. He's the thing that makes the whole thing run. Your whole thing that you want to do that in those games is go Dracula into MODOK. That's the thing you want to do basically every single game. If there's a card you want to draw every single game in an archetype, it's a really good card in that archetype. That's MODOK. Negasonic Teenage Warhead. Not a good card. Let's start there. I have seen her used for like specific purposes. Like, for example, I've seen her used in the Miles Morales Stature deck to snipe Galactus players. I used to see her used with Daredevil to snipe Shuried Red Skulls. I think now that Shuri Red Skull's out of the meta, she is like, you better have a damn good idea of what you're doing with this card. Now, she is at least very unique, and that does give me a little bit of pause on putting her in Please Do Not, but I do think she goes in Please Do Not. I'm not saying she's unplayable. That's not where she goes. She's not in the completely worthless tier, but it's like, this is probably not a good use of this amount of tokens. So she's going to go in Please Do Not for me. Nimrod. Nimrod is a really interesting card. Another super limited Series 5 card. I think it's one of those cards where, like, if you want to do something specific, and that something specific is play it with, like, Shuri Galactus Destroyer, you can buy Nimrod. I wouldn't personally. I don't think he's worth it for that. But I do think that deck is a little bit better than, say, anything that runs Negasonic. Probably. So let's put Nimrod in the Are You Cooking tier, where it's like, do you have a really good idea for this card that you really need to buy it? Because frankly, I don't think there are ever going to be situations where you really need to buy this. Next up is Sauron. Sauron, definitely an awkward card. I used to have him rated very low. Now, the reason I used to have him rated so low is that people used to only play him in Shuri, and he used to only make that deck worse. Like, it's not a coincidence that the nerf that they gave to Shuri was you can't play Cosmo in your deck, which is the same thing that playing Sauron did to your deck. Like, you basically pre-nerfed your own Shuri deck by playing Sauron in there, and so for that reason, he was always at the bottom of these tier lists, because whenever you bought him, you were just costing yourself percentage points. You were just losing more games because you bought this card, and that's very unlike any of the other cards, which at least usually can do something. They aren't going to trick you into thinking they're good and then actually lose you games like Sauron used to. Now, I think that said, he's going in the Are You Cooking tier, which is like the upper mid, I would say, or maybe the lower mid, depending on how we think about it. He's not someone I have a ton of ideas for, but I do think, you know, you play a Sauron Shuri deck if you want. If you have a good read on the metagame and you think this would be the good time to do it, I don't know if that time is ever soon, because we have a lot of really powerful cards like Shang-Chi running around that I think might worry you. But that said, you know, if Sandman ever picks up, you know, maybe Sauron Shuri deck can be a good counter to that. I personally doubt it based on the other cards that exist, but who knows? Sentry, downgrading in May, a better card than people give it credit for, and that said, still probably not, you know, the most elite of the cards downgrading. I think it's an okay card. It's a little more telegraphed than you'd like. Like, when you run into people who actually know what you're doing, when you go, like, Sentry, they know that they should fill up that lane before you can Viper that Void over to them, and that's kind of game-losing when it happens to you, but other than that, like, it does do some things well. It does have a ton of upside, and that is worth mentioning. Like, it's a card with a ton of upside. That matters. Next up, Shadow King. Shadow King going into completely worthless. This card sucks. This is a terrible, terrible, awful fucking card. I have no idea. You know how hard it is to get me to drop F-bombs in my videos on YouTube? It's actually really hard to do, as surprising as that may seem. This card fucking sucks. Everyone thinks, oh, it'll be so much better when you bring it to 3. It can buff by Silver Surfer. You can play Cyclops to be better like 95% of the time. Like, this is not an effect that you need in any game. It wasn't even when Shuri was around and this thing was around, you still weren't playing it. Like, it's just not good. Please make him a 2/3. Do anything to make this dude playable. Like, I get it, you get the Silver Surfer thing, but like, at least if it was a 2/3, it would be like a comfortable switch in for a Sarah deck some of the time. This card is ass. I need them to do something about it. Next up is Shanna. Shanna, I think, goes in the please do not tier. I have not seen any evidence for her being better than going in the please do not tier. I did think that what Darrow was doing was a pretty clever take on Sarah, where you like have, okay, you play Shanna and you get to, it lets you play Storm and Sarah. You get like this cute little explosion of power on turn 6. I thought that was pretty cool. And then I went and looked at the stats on Untapped and they were not good. And now I'm like way, way more out on Shanna than I was before. Because I used to be like, I looked at that list and I was like, yes, it's time for Shanna. And then I looked at the win rate and I was like, oh no, man. Oh no. Like, I really liked it. I just like, she just doesn't seem to have it, is kind of the best way I could say it. Where it's like, she just doesn't have it. I was so into it. I thought it was such a cool thing that he was doing. I thought it was the coolest shit. I was so into it. I actually like that. That's like the metagame development that made me the most sad. Is the numbers on that list looked as bad as they did? Like fuck. I really like Shanna, and I really want her to be good. And maybe it's just people who don't understand how to play the list. I think that's entirely possible. There didn't seem to be a lot of people who didn't really get it. But I think for now, until I see like some proof of concept with this, I'm going to put her in the please do not tier. But out of deference to myself and the fact that I love her, I'm going to put her at the top of the please do not tier. Next up is Silver Surfer, downgrading in May. Thank God. It has been so long since that card came out, and now we're finally getting him into the general population. I really appreciate that. That is a good card to be around. I do think it's a potentially very impactful card. I think Silver Surfer is actually a very underrated archetype. It's just kind of clunky now, where like when you do everything and get everything right, it's a good deck. I think Storm Juggernaut's a very powerful play that it encourages you to do. The better Storm is, the better I think the deck is a lot of the time. But the fact that you now have to rely on Storm Juggernaut, where you used to be strong enough to just not have to even need that in your deck, it does speak to the amount of downgrades the deck has taken. Next up is Snowguard in the completely worthless tier. Don't buy this card. Don't look at this card. Don't even click on your shop when she's in it, or you might accidentally click on it and buy her. Don't do that. She sucks. Next up is Stature. Stature is going at the top of the elite role players for me. Just a great card. You really only need Black Bolt to put her in decks, and right now she's part of what the numbers suggest is one of the best archetypes in the game. The Black Bolt, Stature, Darkhawk, Zabu, Miles Morales, Jeff deck. Of those cards, Stature and Jeff, she's the cheapest. Darkhawk downgrading. That deck might become a lot more accessible going forward. Definitely worth considering. She's great. She's a great card. I've been a Stature truther since day one. I'm glad she's finally getting a time to shine. Stegron is, I think, going to go into the please do not tier. Or maybe actually, you know what? Stegron is going to go in Are You Cooking? I don't think he's great. I don't think he's amazing. I don't think he's worth 6,000 tokens, so let's get that out there. But he does something that is like mostly unique, and that is be a 4-drop that can win a lane and work with Zabu, right? Like, that's not... It's not... You don't buy him, right? Like, that's one. But, like, he's the kind of card that, like, when he downgrades, it'll be like, oh, I got Stegron. That's kind of a thing. That's kind of a thing. So I'm going to put him at the back of Are You Cooking? But he could very easily be dropped a tier. Next up is Thanos, who is going to go in Buy This When You Can. I think he's going at the top of Buy This When You Can. Not because necessarily he's better. I do think right now Thanos decks are about on par with Galactus decks. Maybe even a little worse. But he's a million times more fun. He opens up so many different archetypes. You can play Thanos and so many different combinations of cards that you effectively get like a bunch of different decks when you buy the guy. So that's the real reason that he's at the top of Buy This When You Can. I think actually probably Hitmonkey is the strongest card in that tier, but that might just be me. Next up is Zabu, who is the last card we're going to talk about. As you can see, the rest of the cards are cards that are going to be released in the upcoming months. Having not played with them, I have no desire to rate them. So, Zabu is amazing. He's an amazing card. He's just incredible. The issue is, we expect him to downgrade at some point, right? Like, he's just... I think Zabu is probably the back end of Buy This When You Can, and you can maybe argue he's better than Hitmonkey. Like, this is a card that is foundational to many archetypes, although, you know, they all revolve around 4-cost cards. Like, we talked about how great Darkhawk was, and Zabu is seeing the beneficiary of that, right? Like, we expect him to downgrade probably a month after May, based on the release schedule. You know, Silver Surfer came out the month before Zabu, so we expect him to downgrade the month after Silver Surfer does. That said, you're gonna be happy you bought him for the entire time until that happens. So he is gonna go in the back end of Buy This When You Can. I think that sort of sums it up for everything here. where I think that, you know, Thanos and Galactus, they get a big boost in terms of buying them because A, they're both part of good decks, B, they are never downgrading, and then you have the elite of the cards that will downgrade, Zabu and Hitmonkey. I understand avoiding Hitmonkey at his current price point. I get it. Totally fair. Next up, going down the list, Stature, Jeff, and MODOK. I think that is an aptly named tier. They are elite role players. They go in basically one style of deck, with the exception of Jeff, who kind of just goes in a lot of decks, but is only like a marginal upgrade, right? So Stature and MODOK do one thing really well. Jeff does a lot of things pretty okay, right? And that's, you know, are you going to pay 6,000 tokens for something that might be like 5% better than Lizard? Maybe. Finally, in the Are You Cookin' tier, Kang is there by virtue of being a big bad. Otherwise, he'd probably be lower. His utility is so unique. There are decks you're going to want to run him in, maybe, but they aren't decks that you should be investing in unless you have a very specific idea that you want to commit to it, right? And that holds true for Nimrod, that holds true for Sauron, that holds true for Stegron, right? Like, if you don't have a very specific idea, and I think the thing with Stegron is often, like, the thing with this tier is often that, like, a lot of these cards go in decks that might be aptly described as a worse version of a different deck. So I do think that that's worth talking about and worth considering. If you think, you know, perhaps it's not the worst version of a different deck, you think maybe there's still room to optimize it, you can just take it and run with it, be my guest. Now, in the Please Do Not tier, Shauna is my favorite of these cards. Master Mold, Ghost, and Negasonic are just cards that are not worth their current price points, and I kind of wish they were, because I get the appeal of a lot of these cards, but in terms of the price point, there's just no way. Downgrading in May, Darkhawk, Null, Silver Surfer, and Sentry are expected to downgrade in May. I have not heard any official communication about this, but this is the expectation based on previous timetables. Now, Darkhawk is by far the highlight here. Null for Galactus decks, very important. And Silver Surfer and Sentry should be useful for people to play around with for sure. None of these cards are actively bad after Sentry's most recent buff. And finally, we have the completely worthless tier. Dazzler, Shadow King, Snowguard. Don't buy these. Don't play these. Don't do it. Do something else. Go outside. Touch grass. Go gamble. Go to a casino. You'd be better off using your money doing that. Like this is not what you want to be doing with your time. This is not what you want to be doing with your money. Don't buy these cards. And with that, thank you so much, y'all. I, as always, am KM Best. It's been a pleasure. I'll see y'all next time. Y'all have a good one.